Thank you for that warm introduction, Lou. And you're right, I am a ham. Why else would I be sitting up here? I noticed all the young faces in the crowd, and I thought, Remnick is unbelievable. He's Pulitzer Prize, National Magazine Awards, more than you can count, writes stories, probably juggles too. And here he reaches into the youthful demo. You know, I know it's
not my fault.
I know. I know it's a night off for Grey's Anatomy, but still, to see all these, usually the room was full of pasty-faced trolls that looked like me, and all you kids showed up. And then I noticed, free food.
Free food.
I'm not going to do a show of hands around who's here for the free groceries, but I know who you are. I was wondering when Andrea called how I ended up in this seat next to David, and I thought maybe Canaletta was booked. That might have been the issue. And I thought, well, David and I have a couple things in common. While I was playing Frisbee, drinking Mountain Dew, and going to a college you never heard of, David was in Moscow winning a Pulitzer Prize. I first edited a weekly in Minneapolis. It's no longer in existence. His first job was editing the New Yorker, and then I finally hit on it. Every single week, David builds, edits, finishes a weekly that dominates the conversation in America, and I read it. So there it is. I'm interested in when you first got the job. You're a writer, and I know a little bit about you, and you have the soul of a writer. And they plop this thing on you that's, what, 80 years old?
75 at the time, but close.
Okay, so 75 years old. So apart from thinking, boy, I hope I don't screw this up.
That was the dominant thought.
Yeah, and so living in fear is not a bad motivator, but what did you think needed to happen with the magazine? What was your thought about what you would do as editor of the New Yorker once you got over the shock that that was in fact your title, no mistake had been made?
I'm still not quite convinced that no mistake had been made, but what happened is that an editor left. Tina Brown left to edit another magazine and start a media company called Talk Media. And I think some usual suspects were either sussed out or asked, or certainly Michael Kinsley was, and I think a couple of others were talked to. And the magazine has to come out every week. I'm not being, faux naive about this. And the New York Post had a little piece, and it looked like the daily racing form. It said something like, Graydon Carter 2-1.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And this was courtesy of, the second most important person in our business after David Carr, Keith Kelly. And it had a bunch of editors whose names you probably know or might know, 3-1, 4-1, like horses of substance. And I think they decided to throw in the name of a writer at the end. And it said, David Remnick, 50-1. And I thought, this is really hilarious and flattering. And I went back to doing what I was doing on a July day. It was very hot, and I was there in my sort of crappy pants and Leon Russell t-shirt. That's how old the t-shirt was, but I remember it.
That's so embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. Mad Dogs and Englishmen all being under the earth now. And I got a phone call to come to the then Condé Nast building to speak to Cy Newhouse.
Otherwise known as the Death Star.
The New Yorker in those days was in a separate building.
Right.
Come see Mr. Newhouse. And I thought, well, this is nice. He wants to sound out some writers about what might be a good idea. And the meeting was brief and somewhat halting, and I thought nothing much of it. And then the next day I got called again. And again I was wearing, although change of clothes, Pink Floyd t-shirt, equally, horrifically old. And slowly it occurred to me in the course of this meeting that maybe it's not informational. And I offered to write a memo about what one might do, having no friggin' clue of what one might do. This is a big deal to me. I always wanted to write at the New Yorker. I was lucky enough to work at the Washington Post. But the New Yorker meant a lot to me. It meant some, you know, and I'm not alone. And I liked Tina Brown a lot. She brought me to that magazine. So I thought a hell of a lot of what she had done gone a far way to revitalizing the magazine and putting it front and center. Agree with everything? No, but you don't agree with everything with any editor.
She put the magazine back in the conversation.
I think very much. I think very much so, and deserves a lot of credit. Right. So over this very odd weekend, I wrote this memo, and I had this idea and that idea, and you know, and it completely emanated from what I like to read, and that's the idea for me of editing the New Yorker. The first year, I would say, was the equivalent of being that feeling you get when you're swimming in the ocean and the waves and you just keep getting knocked over and all you want to do is get a gulp of air. But you can't do that in the media atmosphere of New York because people are watching. There's the observer, there's you, there's this, that, and the other thing in a way that there never was before.
Right.
And people are asking you questions like, what's your vision for the New Yorker? My vision was to stay alive week to week and figure it out. And I think because of who I am, and also my colleagues, things began to evolve naturally. And I think clearly there's a big emphasis on, and also the world changed. The world has changed, you know, not of my doing, and that has done a lot to shape.
Yeah, but let's
shape
talk about that for a second,
Sure.
because you talk about how Cy Hirsch, and we're going to get back to him, has been assigned by 9/11, but really you have.
No. I've only worked for 2 editors my whole life, which is to say, Ben Bradley and Tina Brown.
Right.
That's saying something. They're quite different, and so I had to learn things and glean things on the fly. For example, the first time I had a big investigative story, and I knew it was big. Cy Hirsch was accusing the Prime Minister of Russia, then at the time, a guy named Primakov, of taking bribes from Saddam Hussein, and that was only one element of the story. I said, shit, what do? I tell the owner, because I had read, you know, that Ben Bradley would tell Catherine Grant this in the called the no surprises rule at the Washington Post, which you know about.
And after Cy Newhouse's head went flying off. Then
Not at all.
Okay.
This is the way you learn. So I call up and I say, I guess we're on Cy David terms pretty quickly, and we have this piece, and I explained at great length what it was, and there was a pause, and then he said, well, that sounds very interesting. And I thought, I get it.
Right.
And that's the way you learn your job. You get it by doing and figuring things out. And also, Bradley very frankly said the only way to be able to do a good job as an editor, and what you must have, is a great owner. And they come in all shapes and forms, but there aren't many of them. And what I did discover is that I had complete, insofar as complete editorial freedom exists in this country, whether it's under a Sulzberger or a Graham or a Newhouse, I had it.
Right.
And I was under no illusions, and I am under no illusions that that's to be taken away, meaning I could lose my job, I suppose. But we eat lunch once every 2 weeks, and we talk about, half of it is about the magazine, and half of it's about other stuff. It's completely free. And that was something you had to discover for yourself. That's something that no editor is going to tell a writer.
Well, isn't part of editing, editing is an act of assertion. You decide, you amend, decide.
It's yay and nay is a big part of the job.
Right.
Yes, we publish this. No, we don't publish that. Right. Yes, this talking dog cartoon, not that one.
Right.
Yes, this
I've seen them edit the cartoons. It's ruthless.
It is ruthless, in fact. I would want no cartoonist to see this. It's very, and not a lot of laughing goes on its own. That's one part of it. The other part, I think this is quite different from my place than yours, which is immensely smaller.
Right.
I can almost get my hands around, bad metaphor, harassment metaphor. I can almost talk with and deal with personally every person, certainly every writer that's writing at least with some frequency, and certainly editors, if not on a daily basis and pretty frequently. I don't think Bill Keller numerically can do that.
He comes by and hugs me every day.
Every day.
Just so you know. But
And a lawsuit is still an option, David.
yes, I call HR, tell them to lay off. But
We publish a dozen, essentially, aside from details, we publish a dozen things a week.
right.
You're publishing hundreds of things a day. You can't even read, no editor can even read the whole paper, much less, I read everything that goes in my
Right,
magazine
but you're
3-4 times.